The old photograph is a classic and deeply unsettling horror trope that plays on our innate fear of the unknown, the supernatural, and the idea that images can trap or preserve something far more sinister than just a moment in time. These stories often follow a similar structure. An ordinary person stumbles upon an old photograph, only to find themselves drawn into a mystery that defies logic and chills them to the bone. The story typically begins with the protagonist, a curious collector, an antique enthusiast, or just someone with an eye for forgotten treasures, finding an old photograph in an unexpected place. It might be tucked inside a dusty book, hidden in the back of a thrift store frame, or even discovered in the attic of a newly inherited home. At first glance, it seems ordinary. A black and white or sepia-toned image, perhaps of a family, a group of children, or a lone figure in an empty landscape. But something about it feels off. Maybe it's the way one person in the photo stares directly at the camera with an unsettling intensity, or how the background seems subtly wrong, a distorted reflection, a shadow where there shouldn't be one, or a figure that wasn't noticed at first. What makes these stories so compelling is the protagonist's growing obsession with the photograph. They might try to research its origins, only to hit dead ends. No records of the people in it, no matching locations, or worse, fragmented hints of tragedy. An old newspaper clipping mentions a disappearance. A local legend speaks of a cursed family. A faded name on the back leads to a gravestone. The deeper they dig, the more they realize that the photograph is not just a relic of the past. It's a warning. Soon, strange things start happening. The figure in the photograph seems to move when no one is looking. The protagonist catches glimpses of them in reflections, dreams, or even standing at the edge of their vision in waking life. Friends and family dismiss it as paranoia, but the protagonist knows something is reaching out from the photograph. Some versions of the story suggest that the person in the image is trapped, a lost soul bound to the photo, seeking help or revenge. Others imply that the photograph itself is a doorway, and by looking at it, the protagonist has invited something in. The climax of the story usually involves a horrifying revelation. Perhaps the protagonist learns that everyone who has ever owned the photograph has met a grim fate. Maybe they find out that the person in the image was never really human at all, but something far older and more malevolent. In some variations, the protagonist attempts to destroy the photograph, only to realize too late that doing so doesn't end the curse, but instead seals their own fate. The best versions of this story end with a chilling twist. The protagonist thinks they've escaped, only to discover that they are now part of the photograph's legacy. Perhaps they see their own face in a newly discovered image, or they realize that the figure they've been seeing was themselves all along, lost in time. The cycle continues, and the photograph claims another victim. The old photograph plays on deep-seated fears, the idea that the past is never truly gone, that images can hold power beyond what we understand, and that curiosity can lead to irreversible horror. It's a reminder that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. Would you like a specific example or variation of this kind of story, or perhaps a deeper dive into the psychological horror elements? There comes a moment, subtle at first, easy to dismiss, when the protagonist realizes the photograph is not just an old, forgotten image. It is alive in ways they cannot explain. This is the first strange occurrence, the pivotal scene where the eerie fascination with the photograph shifts into something darker, something interactive. It is no longer a relic of the past. It has become a doorway, and something is stepping through. At first, it's small things. The protagonist catches a flicker of movement in their peripheral vision. Just a trick of the light, they tell themselves. But then they notice the temperature in the room drops whenever the photograph is nearby. A breath of cold air against their neck when no window is open. The faint scent of something long decayed. Old paper, yes, but also something else. Something organic, like dried flowers left too long in a sealed room. Then, the figure in the photograph begins to change. Not in obvious ways. Nothing so crude as a smile turning into a scream. No, it's more insidious. The angle of the head shifts slightly between glances. The eyes, once looking off to the side, now seem fixed directly on the viewer. The protagonist tells themselves it must be their imagination, a trick of memory, but when they place the photograph face down and return later, they find it has been moved, turned upright again, watching. Sleep brings no relief. The protagonist dreams of the person in the photograph, standing in an empty field, in the corner of a room, at the end of a long hallway, always silent, always staring. They wake with a gasp, convinced they are not alone, only to find the photograph on their nightstand, though they could have sworn they left it in the study. The final confirmation comes when someone else notices. A friend, a partner, a child, someone who has no reason to share the protagonist's growing paranoia, comments unprompted. "Who's that?" pointing to the figure in the photograph. They look wrong. And when the protagonist asks what they mean, the response chills them to the bone. They weren't there before. The first strange occurrence is the point of no return. It is the moment the protagonist understands on a primal level that they are no longer the observer. They are the observed. And whatever is in that photograph is very, very aware of them. The horror here lies not in a sudden, violent confrontation, but in the slow, creeping realization that the rules of the world are not what they seemed. The photograph is no longer just an object, it is a presence, and it is hungry. The protagonist's investigation has led them to the edge of something terrible, a truth that should have remained hidden. The dark discovery is the moment when all the pieces click into place, revealing a horror far worse than they imagined. It's no longer about eerie coincidences or fleeting glimpses of something unnatural. Now, they hold tangible proof that the photograph is not just haunted, it is cursed. They find the records. Maybe it's in a crumbling newspaper archived in the back of a library, its edges brittle with age. Maybe it's a whispered confession from an elderly local who remembers the story but never dared speak of it. However the truth comes to light, it is undeniable. The person in the photograph should not exist. The facts are fragmented but damning. A child who vanished without a trace decades ago, last seen wearing the same clothes as the figure in the image. A family that died under mysterious circumstances shortly after the photo was taken. A house that burned to the ground, its ruins said to be plagued by a presence that watches from the windows. The protagonist's hands tremble as they piece together the connections, each revelation more unsettling than the last. Then comes the most chilling detail of all. Others have found this photograph before. Old police reports mention a similar image found clutched in the hands of a missing hiker. A diary entry from the 1940s describes a portrait that would not stop watching. Every lead circles back to the same conclusion. Whoever possesses the photograph meets a grim fate. Some went mad. Others simply disappeared. A few were found dead under inexplicable circumstances, their faces frozen in expressions of pure terror. The protagonist now understands the depth of their mistake. This was never just a ghost story. The photograph is a trap, a snare set by something that thrives on attention. By seeking its history, they have fed it. By learning its secrets, They have bound themselves to it. And worst of all, the figure in the photograph is no longer confined to paper. They see it in reflections when no one else is around. They hear footsteps echoing their own when walking alone at night. The air grows heavy and still whenever the photograph is near, as if the world itself is holding its breath. The protagonist realizes with dawning horror that they are not just the investigator anymore. They are the next victim. The dark discovery is the point where curiosity turns to dread, where the past reaches out with rotting hands to drag the living into its grip. The truth does not set them free. It marks them. And now, it's too late to look away. The boundary between image and flesh dissolves without warning. It begins in the dead hours of the night, when the mind teeters between sleep and waking, that vulnerable threshold where reality softens. The protagonist stirs, sensing a presence before they even open their eyes. The room is too cold. The air tastes metallic, like old coins pressed against the tongue. And then, movement, a shape at the foot of the bed. She stands perfectly still, her silhouette outlined by the faint glow of streetlights bleeding through the curtains. The girl from the photograph. Her dress is the same, that dated fabric now hanging limp and slightly too large, as if the body beneath has withered since the snapshot was taken. Her face is obscured by shadows, but the whites of her eyes catch the light just enough to gleam. The protagonist's breath lodges in their throat. This isn't sleep paralysis. This isn't a dream. The details are too sharp. The frayed hem of the girl's dress, the unnatural way her fingers curl at her sides, the faint smell of damp earth rising from her. She doesn't speak, doesn't blink. She simply watches, her head tilted at an angle the human neck shouldn't comfortably achieve. Then, the photograph is in their hands. They don't remember grabbing it, but there it is, the glossy surface icy to the touch. The space where the girl once stood in the image is now an empty blur, as if the camera itself refused to focus where her body should be. A choked sound escapes the protagonist's lips. The girl at the foot of the bed takes a single step forward. The lamp flickers on. Empty air. The protagonist scrambles upright, heart hammering, but the room is ordinary again. The photograph lies innocently on the nightstand. The girl is back in the frame, her expression unchanged. Yet something is undeniably different. The background of the image has darkened, the edges of the photo slightly warped as if exposed to moisture. When the protagonist lifts it, their fingers come away damp. From that night on, she appears more frequently, not just in the bedroom, in hallway mirrors, in the periphery of crowded streets, once even standing motionless in the rain outside their window, her waterlogged dress clinging to skeletal limbs. Each sighting lasts only seconds, but the after image burns into the protagonist's vision like a flashbulb's ghost. The worst part? She's getting closer. The girl appears is the moment the haunting ceases to be an abstract terror and becomes an intimate violation. She is no longer trapped in paper and silver nitrate. She has chosen her next vessel, and she will not be put back. The protagonist has reached the end of their desperate search for answers, but the truth does not bring clarity, it brings damnation. The final revelation is not a moment of triumph, but of horrifying enlightenment, where every breadcrumb of discovery coalesces into a nightmare too vast to escape. This is when the photograph reveals its true nature, not as a mere haunted object, but as something far more ancient and ravenous. It begins with a slip of paper tucked behind the photograph, brittle with age, a name, a date, a location. Or perhaps it's a hidden image revealed only under ultraviolet light, showing what was always there but never meant to be seen. The girl not standing among the living, but hovering just behind them, her hands outstretched as if to push them into the frame. The protagonist's breath catches. They've been asking the wrong question all along. It was never who the girl was. It was what she wanted. Deeper research leads to a forgotten ritual, a warning scrawled in the margins of an antique journal. The lens steals more than light. Old photographs, it seems, were once believed to trap fragments of the soul, and some subjects never fully left the moment they were captured. The girl is not a ghost in the traditional sense. She is a remnant, a consciousness suspended in silver nitrate, starving for release, and the only way out is to take someone else's place. The protagonist's hands shake as they examine the photograph under a magnifying glass. The background details they once dismissed now form a pattern. A sigil, a boundary, a cage. The other figures in the photo are not oblivious to the girl's presence. They are terrified of her, their faces frozen in subtle grimaces, their bodies angled away. The protagonist's reflection glints in the glass. For the first time, they notice something new, their own face, faintly superimposed in the photograph's corner, as if the image is slowly absorbing them. Then comes the final gut-chilling realization. The photograph is not just haunted, it is hungry. Every owner before them has vanished, their faces eventually appearing in the background of the image, their eyes wide with silent pleading. The girl is not the victim. She is the lure. The photograph is a living thing, a cursed artifact that feeds on attention, and the protagonist has fed it well. The last piece of the puzzle falls into place when they find their own initials carved into the back of the frame, carved in handwriting they don't recognize, but which mirrors their own. A date is scribbled beneath it. Tomorrow's. The final revelation is the moment the protagonist understands they are not solving a mystery. They are living the final act of one. The photograph was never lost. It was waiting. And now it has chosen its next occupant. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next one. Bye for now.